Welcome everyone to the Connect in Elkhart County Community Conversation Series. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Joe Nickel. I'm a principal at Yarden Company, an urban design and development planning firm based in Cincinnati that, along with our partners at Tool Design Group, have been commissioned by the Community Foundation of Elkhart County to help build a world-class trail and pathway system for the county. This project has three primary goals: build infrastructure that works for recreation, transportation, and economic development, better connect communities within the county and connect the county to its surroundings, and identify and fill gaps to build and operate the network. Since we commenced in June, several recurring themes have started to emerge that shape how we are thinking about this and undertaking the task of building the broader coalition. The overarching theme is that most of the planning work has already been done, and now is the time to come together, roll up our sleeves, and get to work. This is where we thrive at Yard and where the Community Foundation's impact is typically most felt. This discussion is the second of a series of conversations. Last episode's focus was on creating a broad and diverse coalition across a number of domains and jurisdictions to expand pathways and trails. Today's episode is all about building and operating a world-class trail network. More on that in a minute. But first, some housekeeping. The format for these discussions will include some introductory panelist remarks and a sharing of their experiences, followed by a conversation with the audience. As a note, we are recording today's event, and it will be posted along with the other episodes on connectinelkhartcounty.com. If you have a question, please use the question function in Zoom, and we'll do our best to get to those questions during our hour together. Okay, let's get started. But before we do, let's get an answer to that trivia question. Elkhart County has a combined 68 miles of bike lanes, trails, and pathways. You can see how this compares to other similar regions. And these are the types of places that Elkhart County is competing with for attracting talent and economic growth. A robust trail network has been shown to be one powerful ingredient to achieving both of those objectives. If bike and walkability is going to be part of the growth strategy in Elkhart County, we have some work to do in this area. As we do so, we are not so much building a plan as we are formulating a strategy for implementation. The county has completed dozens of plans for bike lanes, trails, and pathways, and there's a growing consensus that it is time to refocus on implementation. And that is why we are all here. Implementation takes accountability, collaboration, creativity, funding, and follow-through. This is the focus of today's discussion. To help us, we are lucky to have with us two Erics from different parts of the country that have played instrumental roles in ushering the growth of robust bike lane and pathway systems in their own communities. Eric Rogers is a co-founder and executive director of BikeWalkKC. He leads a team of advocates and educators who are transforming Kansas City into a healthier, more sustainable, more livable, and more competitive region. He works with local communities to improve public policy, deliver educational programs, and implement new infrastructure such as bike lanes, trails, sidewalks, and crosswalks. Eric Boerer is from Pittsburgh's Bike Pittsburgh and is one of the founders of the Free Ride community bike program. He coordinated Bike Pittsburgh's first Bike Fest, which is a multi-day bicycle festival and celebration, drawing thousands of participants that continues to this day. Although a native originally of Eastern Pennsylvania, he attended college in Pittsburgh and says that he first fell in love with the bicycle, which then made him fall in love with the city of Pittsburgh. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to refer to Eric from Kansas City as Eric and Eric from Pittsburgh as E-Rock, as his friends refer to him. Before the show, we went through a very sophisticated lottery system, and Eric from BikeWalkKC, you selected the winning number. So take it away.
Thanks, Joe. I'm happy to win something today. Again, I'm Eric Rogers with BikeWalkKC in Kansas City. We're the local nonprofit that works on education and advocacy and a whole bunch of other things I'll share. Going to the next slide, give you all just a little bit of a sense for our region. We're a bi-state metro, and we span Missouri and Kansas. We go about 500,000 in Kansas City, Missouri, the principal city, and about 2 million total in our region. We have 5 counties, more than 100 cities, 2 state capitals. And so for a lot of this type of work, our geographical and structural situation can make cooperation challenging a lot of times. And so I'll share a little bit today about how local governments do various things in terms of local government, interlocal agreements, aligning various plans, and often it's about moving kind of on parallel paths at different speeds, but all eventually towards the same direction. And something that's starting to happen recently is our transit agency, which is one of the only bi-state agencies, has started to get more involved in trails and transit-oriented development. And so trying to bring more things under the transit agency when we can. So our organization, we're about 10 years old now. We have a kind of a unique scope of work all under one roof. In a lot of places, we'd be 2 or 3 different organizations, but the history of things here led us to be a lot more integrated. We started out about 10 years ago. I was a frustrated bike commuter back in the late 90s and really didn't have bike lanes or trails or anything in our community. So I started getting involved in public meetings and started volunteering with our statewide advocacy group. And then eventually in 2011, we launched BikeWalkKC. And we've now gone from 3 co-founders to a team of almost 30 people. We do some of the traditional things that organizations like ours do. So we work on public policy and advocacy. We have a large education program and do a lot of safe routes to school work. Some of the things that are more unique about us is we have an urban planner on staff. So we're often partnering with firms like Yard and others on planning projects. We also own and operate the bike share system here in Kansas City. And then finally, we're starting to get into more research, especially around researching the health outcomes of our Safe Routes to School program. So there's a lot going on, but we can keep going on the slides. In terms of how we fund our organization, we started out with a grant from an old partnership of the League of American Bicyclists and the bike industry. We were lucky to get a startup grant, and we then created a bike ride, a brewery tour to pull in the match money, and that's kind of how we got going. And now we do a lot of the traditional nonprofit fundraising with individual donors, foundations. We've been very fortunate to have a lot of government contracts and grants, and then we do a lot of fee for service and generate revenue that way. So it's pretty diverse, and I'm always happy to answer questions about that later on. But in terms of our trail system here in the Kansas City region, we have a regional kind of vision that's organized under the name Metro Green. It's one regional system, but it's locally implemented. Again, I mentioned that really diverse government structure means that it takes a lot of planning and cooperation. So a lot of this happens at the Metropolitan Planning Organization, where they plan the big framework, and a lot of it is compiling the local plans for municipalities and counties. So far, everything is eventually constructed and operated and maintained by each local government unit. We do not yet have an overall structure regionally for this, although there is a long-term vision to do a bi-state, multi-county funding mechanism for trails, but that's still going to be quite a ways off. We've built probably about 40 to 50% of our full trail system since about the late 1990s. So we still have quite a ways to go. A lot of the system focuses on streamway corridors. We have a couple of rail trail conversions, but it's primarily streamway corridors. With the Metro Green Trail system, there's also a natural resources conservation program. So a lot of these corridors are also about protecting water quality, preserving open space, preserving streamway buffers. One pretty successful regional component of this is the local governments have developed a wayfinding system and a regional mile marker system. So every several hundred feet, there's a marker on the local trails that kind of gives you a local reference point, but more importantly, it provides a location number for emergency services to come find you on the trail if you have a problem while you're out there. So having such a diverse region and trail system means the funding picture can be really diverse and complicated. So we have a lot of the traditional tax funded mechanisms for trails. We have one county that dedicates a part of their property tax specifically to trail development. Several cities and counties have their own sales tax. It's often a parks and recreation sales tax that funds trail development. We do have some examples of where cities are using things like impact fees from new development to fund trails, or having developers include trail construction when they're doing a development that's on the trail plan. We've had tourism funds. Federal grants have been really key in Kansas City. A lot of these local sources are matching federal dollars. So things like CMAQ, Transportation Alternative Surface Transportation Program, those have been really instrumental in leveraging local dollars. And then trail-oriented development is kind of a new term that we're talking about here in Kansas City. One of the counties just partnered with the transit agency to acquire an old railroad corridor and turn it into a trail corridor. And it's part of a master plan for this corridor to eventually include rail transit with the trail system. So they're approaching development at trailheads along the line from an economic development perspective. And, can we start capturing value from some of the development here to start funding the operations and maintenance of the trail? And then in addition to the trail system, on the next slide, we're also working to knit this together with the on-street connections in our region. It's especially important for our urban core and the already developed areas where we can't go back and add trails. And so we're starting to do a variety of things with cycle tracks and protected bike lanes to provide a more trail-like experience in the urban areas. And then a lot of our suburban areas have done a really good job of including side path trails as they build out and expand the arterial streets. And so really where we're at now is starting to take a lot of these scattered pieces and connect them together and knit it into more of a functional regional system. And with that, I think I will conclude my part of the presentation. I just wanted to share on the next slide an image from a Better Block or a pop-up demonstration project we did a few years ago. We reduced a large downtown street from 5 lanes to 2 lanes and did all kinds of placemaking and interesting things. The really cool story out of that is our transit agency brought a demonstration of a solar-powered bus shelter, plopped it down right in the middle of the traffic calming demonstration. And then folks started to come up to the shelter and sit down and wait for the bus. And the buses going by started stopping and picking people up at the shelter. So it was a really fun experience to see people getting hands-on to experience what the street could be. And then the success story, as a few years later, we were able to get the city to do a road diet and add some buffered bike lanes to the street. So it was a really good experience. I'm happy to answer questions afterwards, and my contact information is here if you want to follow up with me later on. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. I think one question that we would have, or maybe this example, this image that you have on the screen is a good example of this, is what are some examples of some government contracts that you have had? That was a question that came up when you were talking about the different ways that you're engaged to do your work.
So we operate safe routes to school programs for a couple of counties in our region. So that's things like bike education, walking school buses, technical assistance, our community planning program. We often are hired by local governments along with other professional firms to do bike ped, master planning, corridor planning, things like that.
Great. Hopefully, David, that answers your question. Thank you. All right. With that, we're going to switch gears to the other Eric, E-Rock from Bike Pittsburgh.
Hey there, everybody. Good afternoon. Like Joe said, my name is Eric Boerer. I'm the Advocacy Director of Bike Pittsburgh, and most of my friends do call me E-Rock, which is where that came from. Some quick background on Pittsburgh. It was interesting listening to the other Eric because a lot of we have a lot of parallel paths going on here. So Pittsburgh is around 300,000 within a county of about 1 million. And we specifically focus on the city of Pittsburgh urban core, which we sort of define as the city of Pittsburgh plus all of the municipalities that touch the city of Pittsburgh, which is approximately 30 or so. But we really mostly focus within the city of Pittsburgh, but do some work outside. The city of Pittsburgh is obviously like the leader in a lot of this development that we see. And then you see a lot of the neighboring municipalities who then follow a lot of the city's lead. This first picture is a picture of a bike rack. And I like to start the story of our organization with the bike rack, because it's sort of become an iconic symbol of the organization. That bike rack itself, you can see, I don't know if you're familiar with Pittsburgh, a future slide will show a map, but that's sort of a gesture drawing of the three rivers coming together into our point, which is what we call the downtown area. And but I'd start with that because it was one of the things that when we started, again, like Eric, I was a frustrated 90s bicycle commuter who wanted to do something and make some change. So when we started the organization in 2001, bike racks were one of the first things that we worked on. And it was mostly because A, it was a simple thing to do, but B, it helped us get our foot in the door with the foundation community as well as with the city itself to build legitimacy for our organization, because we were seen as a bunch of weird crazies who were attempting to make Pittsburgh a bike-friendly city. But it also, like I said, helped us get our foot in the door in the foundation community. Pittsburgh is a city of that had its peak in the Gilded Era, the Gilded Age. So we have a lot of old robber barons who left a lot of foundation money, and so as I'm going through this, know that a lot of funding does come from foundation support here. You can go on to the next slide. So when we started in 2002, Pittsburgh was fresh off being ranked the worst city in the nation by Bicycling Magazine to ride a bike in. And we started with the brown there is some bike trails that the bike trail network that started. And the green are some bike lanes which were mostly concentrated around parks or within parks. The trails were built sometime in the 90s. We're starting to get built in the 90s, right after our deindustrialization era, when all the steel mills closed. They were able to, the mayor at the time was able to jump in and try to take over some of those old rail lines and turn them into trails and try to bring back the riverfront. I should mention right now that Bike Pittsburgh does not really work on the trails themselves. There's another organization called Friends of the Riverfront, which helps manage and steward the trails. We mostly work on sort of the bike culture as well as the on-street bike network. So one thing you need to know about Pittsburgh too is it's a really, really hilly city, and it's an old city, and every square inch seems to be taken up by something, whether it's parking, whether it's, we have very narrow streets. A street wider than 2 or 3 lanes is really extremely rare in the city. They just simply don't exist. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. So we realized the challenges were pretty big in order to just start putting bike lanes in places due to a lot of those constraints. So we began trying to, with the concept of starting to build community. We really focused on trying to build out a network, or a human network of people who were obviously interested in bikes, but also getting engaged in bicycling and politically active in bicycling. So we do that, and we put our mission under 3 categories, which is community, education, and advocacy. So I'll start with one of the educational components. Is we, while all these things are new, it's something we've been focusing on since the start, because the government here really wasn't doing any of this stuff, and our local state DOTs weren't either. So we had a lot of education things, like you can see on our website. We have a lot of education videos, just really in the saddle trainings. We do all types of things to help people get on bikes and learn how to ride them safely. One of the first publications we made back in 2007, so about 5 years after we started, was a bike map of Pittsburgh. It was a paper map, and it still exists today, and it's a really extremely popular item we have. We produce about 50,000 every 2 years, and we go through them. It's also a great avenue to get some corporate support. But that also, the other thing that's nice about that is it's sort of, because we really lacked a good bike plan, the bike map itself acted and it still acts as sort of an unofficial bike plan for the city of Pittsburgh. It shows a lot of where the gaps are, visually shows where the gaps are and where we need to improve. And then we also focus on advocacy. And so we decided to start, people who live within neighborhoods often are the most knowledgeable about that neighborhood. So we have started and formed a network of neighborhood-specific bicycle and pedestrian advocacy groups of members who really try to take on a lot of those hyper-local issues and push for change within their neighborhood. Because we found we couldn't really handle a lot of the small items, like we need a better crosswalk here. So we really depend on these small groups to help with that. You can go on the next slide. With that, we also worked on the other parts of the bike infrastructure, which isn't like physical infrastructure really, but is part of it, making it easy to ride a bike. One early campaign was making sure that all of the buses within our system were 100% had a bike rack on the front, as well as we have an incline, 2 inclines which are now bike friendly, as well as 1 light rail line. And we also were integral in helping secure funds through CMAQ and federal funds and local foundation, as well as corporate support to found the bike share program, which we do not run. It's its own nonprofit now, but we were integral in getting it started. You can go to the next slide. Another part of I mentioned is building the community. One of our keystone events we call Open Streets. Unfortunately, the pandemic has put a bit of a damper on the event itself. We did come back and do it this year. We have to take a year off, but it's previous to that, it was a humongous event. We would attract anywhere from 20 to 30,000 people per event, and basically we would close down stretches of roadway to cars, but open it up to people on bikes, people walking, people roller skating, skateboarding, whatever. Just basically anything that was a non-vehicle use. It's an extremely popular event. We would do them 3 times per year. It's been one of the best avenues for bringing in new people to the organization and kind of helping them understand what it is we do and building up that local bike culture and biking and walking culture. Next slide. And then, of course, you can't talk about this stuff without talking about policy. And one important policy that we worked on in 2016 was a complete streets policy, which we have seen the benefits of. Basically, it ensures that every time a new roadway is built, every time a new roadway is put in, it needs to accommodate bicycling and walking, or have a really good reason why they can. We've seen bike lanes, appear that way, and among other things, like other policies that have gone in place, other zoning changes have all pointed back to this complete streets policy as the reason why they're pursuing it. And then a big win for us was what last year was actually getting the bike master plan together and published in June of 2020. We had the oldest bike plan in the country, dating back to the 90s. and we were finally able to get a brand new one published just last year. Go ahead, the next slide. So I wanted to talk about one recent program that we worked on with the city of, in cahoots with the city of Pittsburgh, in partnership with the city of Pittsburgh, as well as the national organization People for Bikes. People for Bikes secured a whole lot of funding to help with this, and both paid us directly and also helped manage the marketing campaign. In short, it was a marketing campaign to help implement the previously mentioned bike plan and help ideally rapidly implement that bike plan. The idea is to build support amongst the city of Pittsburgh residents for these changes that they'll be seeing. So we really we were a cohort of there were 5 cities total, 4 other cities that had all similar messaging and similar look and feel to a lot of their advertising campaign. But they did a lot of market research and found that words like less stress, more safety, there will be peace on the road when everyone gets a piece of the road. These kinds of things really resonated with people, especially drivers. So this ad campaign was really directed to people who were, on the fence, maybe didn't think much about it, or were drivers themselves, to kind of show that bike lanes are actually beneficial to drivers as well, because it does get bikes out of their way. The next slide. So yeah, the ad campaign included billboards, bus wraps. We had videos even on gas pumps, YouTube, Instagram, all over social media, radio ads. It was a pretty huge campaign, which again, like I said, People for Bikes helped fund. And then in the process, we worked closely with the city of Pittsburgh, who was then designing and trying to build the infrastructure, where we would we partnered with them, as well as our Healthy Ride bike share system, to help with the community outreach, public meetings, just doing that on the ground grassroots support for these kinds of projects. You can go to the next slide. The idea was to again bring that trail experience to the streets, so that all people, as you can see, no matter the age, people will feel comfortable riding on the streets and accessing jobs, school, work. I said that, work, and entertainment, all by using the bike trail system, as well as the on-street bike network. You can go on the next slide. It also inspired the city to really push traffic calming, because, like I said, our streets are extremely tight. All real estate has really been taken up, so we've had to come up with a lot of creative solutions in order to make it to both get people on bikes and make them feel comfortable riding, but without needing to seriously rearrange the streets or, say, eliminate parking in front of people's homes. We have a lot of row homes, not a lot of driveways, so we really were trying to figure a lot of that out. So the city has aggressively been putting in traffic calming to keep cars' speed slow, and while using the bike plan as the guide for where to put a lot of the traffic calming, in order to make it more accessible for cycling itself. So we're really starting to depend on a lot more traffic calming these days. Go ahead, next slide. So we've been able to build up our bike and trail network significantly in the past 20 years. I mean, it's hard to look back, but it does feel like night and day. One thing you don't see on there is that the brown line on the bottom is the trail, is the South Side Trail, that's the one that goes all the way to DC. That connected less than 10 years ago, made the official connection, and that's been a windfall of tourism and just general recreational use. It's really the shining star in our trail network. Go ahead to the next slide. And I'll wrap it up there for now. I think I've been rambling for a bit. So yeah, there's my contact information. And like I said, we really do try to run the gamut of a lot of different things, just like BikeWalkKC. But we really have focused on this building up community. I think I did forget to mention that we are, while we're a city of 300,000, we are a membership organization of around 3,500, which is a significant portion of our income. But I'll pass it back to Joe now to lead the next section.
Great. Thank you for that, Erock. I was looking at that last picture that you had of presumably the father and the son in the cycle track. And I had to do a double take. I thought that was me and my son when I lived in Pittsburgh, but it is not.
That would have been funny.
Yeah, and we can stop sharing the slides there and invite Eric back. There we go. I think where you ended that story, Erock, is a good place to start the conversation. I think we're really fortunate to have you all here who are leading organizations that have been around, as Eric Rogers, you said, for coming up 10 years, and Bike Pittsburgh, similar. And putting myself in the shoes of some of the folks that might be watching today, it's amazing and maybe somewhat daunting, if not impressive, to see the amount of influence and work that you all have been able to usher in the regions that you're focused. Talk a little bit, and I think each of you have something to offer here. Talk a little bit about just the early days of the organization. Kind of think back and kind of reflect upon how you've had to evolve, or the opportunities you've had to evolve and change and reorient or pivot as successes occurred or needs have changed in the community. Because I think it'll help the folks that are watching who may be thinking, okay, how do we take our existing advocacy organizations or groups leading the charge? What's next for groups like ours?
I can jump in and go since Erock just got done presenting. That's a really interesting question. In the early days, we really approached it as like a startup. We had a co-founder that had startup experience, and so we approached it from a social entrepreneurship perspective. And so it was a lot of hustling. We would go table it at any health fair, go present to any neighborhood or business group, because a lot of it was just getting the word out about who we were, what we were doing. Fundraising was a challenge in the beginning because we were the first group like this in our region, and so funders had never funded something like this before. So we were selling ourselves as a new organization, but we were also selling active living as a funding area. And so we had those two challenges at the same time. But then eventually you get to a point where folks know about you and you have a track record, and then it becomes more about, you don't have the capacity for all the demand for services and the folks that want you to come and do things. And so then it becomes about like, how do you get the capacity that really gets you to be able to fulfill the need that's there? And just like any organization, as you grow, you get bigger, you start getting into things like office space and real estate and all of those things. We're really fortunate here in Kansas City, and we have a really strong association of nonprofits that provides a lot of training and professional development and continuing education. And so we've had a lot of good local nonprofit resources in our region to lean on and learn from.
Great.
Yeah, I echo a lot of those things, but I'll add that we had a different experience in terms of the foundation support. Like I said, we have a pretty bloated, I'll say, foundation network here in Pittsburgh due to the aforementioned robber barons of the Gilded era. The Carnegies, Heinz, Mellons, Fricks, all of them, all left foundations that, when we started, we're very approachable and willing to help us because we were really filling a niche that they were trying to fulfill, which was, like I said, right after the deindustrialization of the area. They were really trying to to keep young people in Pittsburgh was a really big focus at the time. Because Allegheny County has the second oldest population next to Broward County, Florida. Because we lost so many younger people in that 90s era. With that said, as far as the early days, one of the things that strikes me was when we started this, a lot of it was just trying to convince the city, who had been doing things the way they've been doing it, that we were like legit and we're serious about this thing. But also, we began to realize that as we were new to this whole thing, so was the city of Pittsburgh. When we first were working with them on a bike lane project, it became clear that they really weren't quite clear how to go about it either. And so I think that was a really big part of us growing in a way together with our city's planning and DPW, was kind of figuring this thing out together. Now, I think that it really did help to have, leadership, a mayor at the time who was wanting, their departments to start to figure this stuff out. But, we went into it thinking that it was going to be a lot easier than it was. But we were really all starting from ground zero of trying to figure it out. Just everything like, okay, we were also a resource limited city. So it's like, we didn't have a traffic engineer. So it was like, well, how do we get the traffic engineering docs? Well, we need to find the funding for that. And then everything just kind of, snowballing its way through, and everybody kind of putting their heads together to figure out these kind of what we thought were simple problems, which ended up being a lot more complicated than they were. And I think that was a theme. Every single thing that we tried to push through was simple in our minds and ended up being a lot more complicated than it was.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And kind of building on that theme, you two operate in kind of different contexts, in the sense that, Eric, in Kansas City, you're working with hundreds of organizations, 2 different states, multiple counties, several cities within each of those counties. And E-Rock, you're working in a single city, but your match lines are, helping figure out a city that's trying to mobilize its own resources to figure out the future of streets. You mentioned in your presentation working with groups like the Friends Group that is managing the riverfront trails. So collaboration in seeing an interconnected network where, me as the user, for instance, doesn't necessarily appreciate that I'm leaving one group's purview and entering another. Talk a little bit, both of you, about the collaboration that's required at both the scales of a region, Eric Rogers, and then with the different kind of, in a more localized sense, E-Rock, with different organizations that are all kind of manning the ship concurrently.
Want me to go first this time, Eric? Yeah, we do work really closely with our Friends Group. It did, I think it did take a while, because for a long time, they were very focused on the trails. And I think it took a while for us to really come to the same conclusions that, it was important for people to be able to ride to the trails as well as ride the trails themselves. And so that, because the trails really are the backbone of our commuter network. They're sort of we view them as like the highway, so to speak, of the bike commuter network, I should say. And so, yeah, it took a while also because we were a new organization. They had a lot more experience, were much older, much more ingrained within the city of Pittsburgh. And so, but we were always very clear from the start to not like step on anybody's toes and just really stay in our bike lane, so to speak. And so, but over the years, we've definitely grown that collaboration, and we realized that we are one and the same, and we do work really closely together. One of the things is I think we've done a really great job as Bike Pittsburgh in marketing our organization and really being like the voice for people for everything bicycle related within the city. So there has been some issues with people coming to us or thinking, I mean, it's even happened where people have donated to us thinking that we're working on the trail system. But, you know, it is all part and parcel the same, you know, the big picture, you know, but it has been, there's no doubt it's been awkward at times to separate, to keep them separated while also trying to maintain that singular vision.
You know, for us in such a diverse region, large and sprawling, a lot of it is about figuring out where people are and meeting them there. You know, our work, like in the urban core in the central city, tends to be much more advocacy oriented. You know, lobbying City Hall, because that's where there's been disinvestment, and we're trying to catch up with new investment. All the way to like some of our suburban areas where they've been building trails for 30 years, and they now have a network that allows you to get to, you know, the big box stores and the office parks, and you can actually do a lot of transportation cycling on the trail system. And so for us, it's sometimes, you know, we're advocates at City Hall yelling at people. Sometimes we're consultants that are actually producing the plans and the designs in some communities. It really varies. Something that's been really helpful in a type of region like ours is we have a really strong metropolitan planning organization, the Mid-America Regional Council. And so since so much of our local network is federally funded, they have a really important role for distributing that federal money that comes into our region. So getting a complete streets policy at the regional level, so that those federal projects coming through asking for money have to show how they go onto the complete streets policy and get points for that. A lot of work predating us from advocates, you know, a generation ago who got seats on the committees at the NPO where funding decisions are made and where they set the criteria for scoring applications for funds. And so we've been able to get it embedded all along the process of how things are funded and, you know, what's decided and ultimately what goes into the plans.
And Eric, you mentioned a little bit as part of that, your services that you're providing these partners. One of the questions we got during the presentation of yours was about kind of just expanding on the different ways you're bringing your expertise to the fore. And just to add on to that before you answer, one thing that's unique about your organization too is that you're also the bike share operator. And so maybe touch on that as well as another quote unquote service that you provide.
Yeah, in addition to the kind of traditional urban planning I've mentioned a few times before, we've also started to have cities come to us and ask for help on public policy development. So, you know, we used to be in a situation where we were lobbying cities to adopt complete streets policies, but now we're starting to get communities come to us and hire us to help them write their policy. In a lot of cases, we've established the need for some of these things, and now we're able to partner with cities to help implement them and get them executed. Bike share is another one of those. It might not seem like it fits on the surface, but bike share is in our community. It's really kind of a gateway to a lot of things to get people interested in biking and walking and trails. And so having that program integrated with everything else just allows for a lot of synergy. So, you know, we may come into one community to start a walking school bus, but then we help them develop the complete streets policy. And then eventually they might make an investment to bring bike share to their community. So it's a way that really kind of ties together a lot of the disparate parts of what we do.
Shifting gears a little bit, Eric, you mentioned, you know, I'm going to mischaracterize this, but sneakily showing up into the boards and the decision-making and being part of the gatekeeping culture for federal funds, for instance, as they enter the region. I think in my mind, that kind of falls under a broader kind of advocacy strategy in kind of bringing the message of an interconnected region to everyday people and their organizations and making sure they're part of every conversation. E-Rock, I was really struck by your partnership with, it was it People for Bikes, and the ad campaign that you produced. One of the questions we received during your presentation was just about how that came to be, and just ballpark what kind of undertaking was that from a budget standpoint?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So how it came to be was the People for Bikes secured funding from a foundation. I believe it was Walton money, actually, to do this sort of program in 5 cities. The other cities, I should say, were Denver, Austin, Providence, and Memphis, I believe. I always forget the last one. It was the application process. We applied with the city of Pittsburgh. People for Bikes came to town, actually interviewed the mayor about their commitment to this. They really wanted to make sure that the cities that they were picking were committed to doing the things that they were actually going to do. Both, verbally committed in that support kind of realm, but also, putting money behind it as well. City public money behind the program. So they convinced People for Bikes that, Pittsburgh was a great candidate for it. And so the city was, and I, kind of tying into something I mentioned earlier with the collaboration. One thing that we've been really concentrating on, both with our bike ped committees and with the Friends of group, has been trying to push for increasing that capital budget funds toward biking, walking, and trail development over the years. So it was a long time of that advocacy. I think helped lead into why we were selected. Now, People for Bikes did supply a lot of the funds for it, direct funds to Bike Pittsburgh to both pay us staff time as well as hire new staff for outreach. We had street teams. They helped pay for the website related to the program, as well as the full ad campaign. They paid for the marketing specialist, the ad firm who developed the whole campaign. Worked with us. They paid for a lot of the marketing materials, whether it was print materials, we even got yard signs and all different kinds of things. So they were able to bring a lot of that to the table, but it also helped bring in a lot of funds to our organization to help us just generally run the organization and pay for the time. So basically anything that was related to building that network out that was identified in the program was basically paid for from the People for Bikes funds. Now, with that said, tying into something Eric mentioned earlier, was it did sort of add a strange element in that, we were these advocates and we all of a sudden became a partner of the city. And so it sort of clipped our wings, so to speak, in terms of being, the rah-rah advocate and really trying to be okay, let's work on, have these focused set of projects that we're going to work on and just get done. And we're going to dial back our anger, so to speak, and just really try to work together to try to get this thing done. And it was a learning experience. I'm really glad we went through it. I think overall it ended up being a pretty successful program. We're almost done with it, I should say. I forgot to mention.
Yeah, and I think you both occupy these interesting spots in the culture of connectivity in your regions, where you're in essence, on one hand, you're detached from government, but on the other hand, you're the first phone call in many cases that someone who wants to create a plan or to build a certain corridor or an intersection. It's really fascinating how over the evolution of your organizations, when we think about implementation, you've gone from being purely trying to get people to call you back and show up on agendas to share your story and talk about the why, to now your phone ringing and saying, or getting asked, how should we be thinking about X, Y, or Z street as we seek to rebuild it? Talk a little bit about the tricks that you have found to be effective in making, for lack of a better phrase, complete streets or connected streets the default setting, to the extent that they are in your communities. you've mentioned a couple things, both of you, around demonstration projects, about tying in traffic safety and traffic calming as part of it. And then E-Rock, you even said something that was interesting, where essentially one of the boxes you have to check if you're building a new street or corridor is basically demonstrating how you're going to opt out of creating a connected street, rather than where we can fit in a bike lane or a trail or a side path or whatever the case may be. Just talk a little bit, we got about 5 more minutes here before we have to wrap up. Just talk a little bit about how you've evolved to becoming that kind of default go-to organization.
I think for us, it all comes down to trust. Developing relationships with your public works staff, your city planners, your mayor, city council members, all those folks, and developing a level of trust where you're comfortable picking up the phone and calling each other or texting, and and being to a point where you can also agree to disagree professionally when the time comes to say, we're working together on this, but as an advocate from the outside, I disagree with this thing, and I'm giving you a heads up that we're going to run a campaign to try to change your mind. But most folks are really professional about that. When you're working together, they understand everybody has different roles to play, and when you're upfront and honest about that, you can really be productive and constructive with it.
I'll say, well, we started in 2002, so we're about to celebrate our 20th anniversary. But when we started, like I said, a lot of the nonprofit community here was really dependent on the foundations. And while we didn't have a lot of struggles getting foundation support early on, but we also early on developed a robust membership program, which I think was unique in Pittsburgh at the time. And so we really focused on getting that local support, but that also helped us because we were starting like in the early days, like we were really early adopters of Twitter and Facebook and other, like online tools. We were able to get people to show up and become I think a politically active force as well. So, when a public meeting happened, if you get a couple, like 100 people at it who are all asking for this thing, it definitely makes an impression on the people who are presenting, who may not even be presenting a bike lane or may not even be presenting something that is going to improve it for people biking, walking. But it's hard to ignore that. And so and on top of that, I think we were pretty early in being able to incorporate online tools and things like that in order to get people active. Now that, of course, the rest of the world is caught up to us, so to speak. But I think that was a pretty key element in our getting to the table, because they didn't want to hear, they wanted projects to succeed too.
Yeah. Well, you guys answered that a little quicker than I thought you were. So I have time to sneak in one more question that it will also be a short answer, I think. Just looking back on your respective experiences, what was the biggest kind of long shot project that either of you were involved with, either leading or helping push from behind, that you thought, we have an uphill battle to fight here, that actually got realized and has kind of changed the narrative around connectivity in either of your regions?
I'll go. I think it clicked first. So, yeah, the first thing that struck me was we worked on what's called the Penn Ave bike lane in downtown, and it was a two-way street, and we were able to work on removing the outbound lane and turned it into a two-way bike lane. So, that checked a lot of boxes in terms of, obviously it was one of the first protected bike lanes in the city of Pittsburgh, but it also really changed the sort of conversation in terms of what our streets are for. Like, do we really need that outbound lane? Can cars still access what they need to using a different street? Can goods and deliveries still happen? All of those things, I think we were able to demonstrate that maybe we don't need, maybe the road lanes that we have now are not set in stone, literally, and that they can be, we can think about them in different ways. And I think we have seen the city, we're much more willing to try out new things. I think after that bike lane went in.
Maybe fitting that it happened in your cultural district as it changed the culture around streets.
That's true.
Rock. Or sorry, Eric. Not you.
Yeah. I think for us, it's our first long corridor with a protected cycle track, which is in its fourth expansion right now. It connects a lot of different neighborhoods. It's on a major commuter corridor. It goes right to the headquarters of Hallmark Cards. So there was a road diet, a complete streets project, a barrier separated cycle track. Went through like a 2-year-long planning process with the community, and then it kind of sat on the plan, waiting for some funding to become available. A key for us was one of my co-founders was elected to city council, so he's now there at City Hall pushing to get some of these things implemented. And the first couple of phases were so successful, the city has gone on and extended it even further beyond the original plan to continue to make more connections to other facilities that are nearby.
Great. Well, I think we're going to have to wrap up there as we're kind of bringing up our closing slides. I'm just going to quickly reflect on some key points that I took away from today's conversation. I want to thank you both. The first is this idea of kind of learning together, particularly in a context where something like a connected region or a complete street or on-street bike infrastructure is a somewhat novel concept and unproven in a particular location. And always reminding through each stage of implementation each other why we're doing this. In Kansas City, it was about a lifestyle option that did not currently exist. In Pittsburgh, it was about attracting and retaining young people in an aging city. The second kind of takeaway that I have is about collaboration. And this idea of working across domains, either with friends groups and other advocacy groups in technical capacities like cities and counties, but also kind of integrating ourselves into boards and even running and winning council seats as part of the kind of growth of the network and the sophistication at which collaboration happens. This idea number 3 around having a broad focus, that this isn't just about creating recreational trails, connecting, parks together, or not that there's anything wrong with that, but having a broader view of what we're trying to accomplish and who we're building for, not just the folks that are sophisticated bicyclists, but whether you're 8 or 80, anyone who wants to get around on foot or bike, making that an enjoyable and easy decision to make. And then this last one about education as not a check the box moment, but as something that is continuously happening throughout a growing region's connected system and network. So the idea of getting out there with an advocacy campaign or an ad campaign, constantly having focus groups and public meetings where we're all showing up wearing the proverbial shirt, advocating and fighting for the extension of, say, that cycle track network or that bike path. So I think there was a lot of great takeaways. I probably only touched on a few of them, but we're going to have to wrap up as we hit the hour here. Thank you both for the insights about implementing, managing, and growing your world-class trail and complete street networks. As we look ahead, we've got another episode happening in about a month. That episode will be all about the return on investment that a trail network can have through placemaking and trail-oriented development, a concept that Eric mentioned early in his presentations. Our guest for that will be the Executive Director of the Indianapolis Culture Trail, Karen Haley, and the Vice President of another Pittsburgher organization, River Life, Stefan Bontrager. A little footnote about Stefan, he is actually a product of Goshen College. So I know he is excited to come back to town virtually and share what his team has been doing along that city's trails and rivers. Erock touched on a little bit of that, and he will go into much greater depth about the placemaking and economic development that's happening at that intersection between blue trails and landside trails. So as always, if you have any questions or want to learn more about the Connecting Elkhart initiative, please visit us on the web. There you'll find a number of ways in which you can reach out and join the movement. One of the easiest ways you can do that is by completing a short 2-minute survey about your trail and pathway experience in the county. If you'd like to revisit or share parts of today's episode, it will be made available for streaming via the Connect website in about the next week or so. In the meantime, please invite your friends and colleagues to join the coalition to make Elkhart County a more walkable, bikeable, and connected county. Thank you again to our panelists, our hosts at the Community Foundation, and to all of our attendees. Until we connect again, take care, everyone.